The walls were thin, the heating barely worked in winter, and the elevator broke down at least twice a month. But it was home. It was our sanctuary in a city that could be cold and unforgiving. I remember the morning everything started to fall apart like it was yesterday. It was a Thursday in October, one of those crisp autumn days when the leaves were just starting to turn golden. I was rushing around the apartment, trying to get Emma ready for school, while Tyler sat at our tiny kitchen table, still in his pajamas, eating cereal and watching cartoons on my old laptop. "Mommy, I can't find my math homework," Emma called from her room, and I could hear the panic in her voice. She was always such a perfectionist, my little Emma, straight A student, never missed an assignment, the kind of kid teachers loved. "Check your backpack again, sweetheart," I called back, while simultaneously trying to pack Tyler's lunch and find my own work clothes. This was our morning routine, controlled chaos, but it worked. We made it work, until my boss decided to destroy my life. What I didn't know that Thursday morning, as I kissed my babies goodbye and rushed to catch the subway to Manhattan, was that I was about to lose everything I'd worked for, everything I'd built for my children. I worked as an administrative assistant at Richardson & Associates, a mid-sized accounting firm in Midtown Manhattan. The office was on the 23rd floor of a glass building that always smelled like expensive coffee and stress. My desk was in a corner cubicle with a view of another building's brick wall, but I didn't mind. The pay wasn't great, $42,000 a year, but it was steady. It covered our rent, kept food on the table, and even allowed for the occasional treat like pizza night or a movie. Mr. Richardson was one of those men who wore expensive suits but had cheap shoes. He was in his late 50s, balding, with the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. I'd worked for him for 3 years, and in all that time, I thought I knew him. I thought he was just another middle-aged businessman trying to make his way in the world. I was so wrong. That morning, I arrived at the office at exactly 8:47 a.m., just like every other day. I hung my coat on the back of my chair, turned on my computer, and started going through the morning emails. Nothing seemed unusual. Mr. Richardson was in his office with his door closed, which wasn't uncommon. He often had early morning calls with clients on the West Coast. But then, around 10:30, I noticed 2 men in dark suits talking to the receptionist. They had that unmistakable look of federal agents, the kind of serious, no-nonsense demeanor that makes your stomach clench, even when you know you haven't done anything wrong. The receptionist, Janet, kept glancing in my direction while she talked to them. That should have been my first warning. At 10:45, Mr. Richardson's door opened, and he called my name. "Sarah, could you come into my office, please, and bring the Morrison account files?" The Morrison account. I knew that file well. It was one of our biggest clients, a chain of restaurants that we'd been handling for 2 years. I grabbed the thick manila folder from my filing cabinet and walked toward his office, my heels clicking on the polished floor. That's when I saw them. The 2 federal agents were sitting in the chairs across from Mr. Richardson's desk. One was a woman in her 40s with short blonde hair and sharp eyes. The other was a younger man, maybe early 30s, with the kind of intense stare that made you feel guilty even when you weren't. "Sarah," Mr. Richardson said with that fake smile I should have recognized years ago. "These are Agents Martinez and Chen from the FBI. They have some questions about some transactions in the Morrison account." My heart started beating faster, but I told myself it was probably just routine. Maybe the Morrison restaurants were being audited, or maybe there was some kind of tax issue that needed clarification. Agent Martinez gestured to the computer screen on Mr. Richardson's desk. "Ms. Thompson, can you explain these transactions here?" I leaned forward to look at the screen, and my world tilted on its axis. Bank transfers, dozens of them, large amounts, $15,000, $23,000, $31,000, being moved between accounts I'd never seen before. And at the bottom of each transfer authorization, clear as day, was my signature. Except it wasn't my signature. It looked like mine, but I knew I'd never signed those documents because I'd never seen them before in my life. I started, my voice coming out as barely a whisper. "I don't understand. I've never seen these before." Mr. Richardson shook his head with what looked like genuine disappointment. "Sarah, Sarah, I trusted you so much. How could you do this to the company? To your own family? But I didn't do this, I said, my voice getting stronger. Those aren't my signatures. I mean, they look like mine, but I never signed these documents. Agent Chen leaned forward. Ms. Thompson, these transfers represent over $400,000 that's been moved out of client accounts over the past 8 months. The signatures on the authorization forms match samples of your handwriting that we have on file. $400,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. That was more money than I'd make in 10 years. I swear to you, I didn't do this, I said, looking directly at Agent Martinez. I don't even have access to these accounts. I'm just an administrative assistant. I file papers and answer phones. According to our investigation, Agent Chen said, consulting a thick folder, you've been systematically transferring money from client accounts into shell companies, then moving that money into offshore accounts. Shell companies. Offshore accounts. I barely knew what those terms meant, let alone how to set them up. This is insane, I said, standing up so quickly that my chair rolled backward. I don't know anything about shell companies or offshore accounts. I can barely balance my own checkbook. But I could see it in their eyes. They'd already made up their minds. In their investigation, I was the perfect patsy. The low-level employee with access to files, someone who could fly under the radar while moving large amounts of money. Mr. Richardson stood up and walked around his desk, placing what I now realize was a calculated hand on my shoulder. Sarah, I know this must be overwhelming, but the evidence is pretty clear. I think the best thing for everyone would be if you cooperated with the investigation. Cooperated? I repeated. Cooperated with what? I didn't do anything wrong. Agent Martinez closed her folder and stood up. Ms. Thompson, you're not under arrest at this time, but I strongly advise you to get a lawyer. This investigation is ongoing and charges may be filed. The room started spinning. Charges, criminal charges, for something I didn't do. In the meantime, Mr. Richardson said, his voice taking on a cold, businesslike tone, I'm afraid I have to terminate your employment, effective immediately, for cause. For cause. Those 2 words would haunt me for months. Termination for cause meant no severance pay, no unemployment benefits, no references, and with a federal investigation hanging over my head, no chance of getting another job. You can't do this, I whispered. I have 2 children. I need this job. I'm sorry, Sarah. Mr. Ice, Richardson said, but his eyes were already moving toward his computer screen. Security will escort you out. You can collect your personal items from your desk. The next 30 minutes were a blur of humiliation. A security guard, a man I'd said good morning to every day for 3 years, stood behind me while I packed my few personal items into a cardboard box. My coffee mug with Emma's handprint on it from when she was 5. A small framed photo of the kids at Coney Island last summer. A little succulent plant that Tyler had given me for Mother's Day. My co-workers avoided eye contact. Some whispered to each other behind their hands. By the time I walked out of that building, I knew the story would be all over the office. Sarah Thompson, the single mom who seemed so nice, was actually a thief who'd stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars. The subway ride back to Queens was the longest 45 minutes of my life. I sat in that rattling train car, clutching my cardboard box, trying to figure out how I was going to explain this to my children. How do you tell an 8-year-old that mommy lost her job because she was accused of stealing? How do you explain to a 5-year-old that everything is about to change? When I got home, the kids were still at school. Our apartment felt different somehow, smaller and more fragile. I sat on our second-hand couch and stared at the eviction notice that had been slipped under our door while I was at work. 30 days. I had 30 days to come up with 1,800 forint plus the 900 I was already behind. I opened my purse and counted the cash in my wallet. $43. I checked my bank account on my phone. 127.42s. $127.42. That's what stood between my children and homelessness. But losing my job wasn't even the worst part. Because when I got home that day, there was an envelope waiting that would change everything. The envelope was thick and official-looking, with the return address of Peterson Property Management. My hands were shaking as I opened it. Notice to quit and pay rent or quit premises, it read in bold letters at the top. Mr. Peterson, my landlord, was a decent man. He was in his 60s, a retired teacher who owned 3 small apartment buildings in Queens. He'd always been patient when I was a few days late with rent, understanding when I explained that my paycheck was delayed or that one of the kids had been sick and I'd had to take unpaid time off work. But this notice was different. This was legal and final. You are hereby notified that your tenancy of the above-described premises is hereby terminated. If you fail to quit and surrender said premises to the landlord within 30 days after service of this notice, legal proceedings will be instituted against you to recover possession of said premises. 30 days. I had 30 days to come up with nearly $3,000, or my children and I would be evicted. I called Mr. Peterson immediately, my fingers fumbling with the phone. Mr. Peterson, this is Sarah Thompson from 3B. I just got your notice, and I need to explain what happened. Sarah. His voice was kind but firm. I heard about the situation at your work. I'm sorry, I really am. You've been a good tenant, and I know you're a good mother. Mr. Peterson, please. I didn't do what they're saying I did. This is all a mistake and I'm going to prove it. I just need a little more time. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Sarah, I wish I could help you. But I've got my own bills to pay. The mortgage on that building, property taxes, maintenance costs. I can't carry tenants who can't pay rent. Just one more month, I pleaded. Please, I'll find another job. I'll figure something out. I'm sorry, Sarah, I really am. But the notice stands. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and cried harder than I'd cried since my mother died. Not just tears, but the kind of sobbing that comes from your soul, the kind that leaves you gasping for breath. That's when I first really noticed my neighbor. And honey, nothing about him made sense. I'd been living in that building for 2 years, and Michael from 3A was still a mystery to me. I'd see him occasionally in the hallway or the elevator. A tall man, maybe 35, with dark hair and kind eyes. He always wore simple clothes, jeans, t-shirts, sneakers. The kind of outfit that said, I don't have anywhere important to be. We'd nod politely when we passed each other. Good morning. Have a good day. That was the extent of our relationship. But there were things about Michael that didn't add up, things I'd noticed but never really thought about until that day when my world was falling apart. First, his Honda Civic. It was a few years old, nothing fancy, but it was always spotless, not just clean, but detailed, the kind of clean that costs money to maintain. And in Queens, where street parking meant your car got dirty just sitting there, a consistently clean car meant either obsessive care or regular professional cleaning. Second, his apartment never had overdue notices taped to the door. In our building, when someone was behind on rent or utilities, the notices appeared like clockwork, but 3A's door was always clear. Third, the packages. Not many, but they came regularly. Small boxes that he'd pick up from the front desk himself. And they weren't Amazon packages or the usual stuff you'd expect from someone who was unemployed and struggling. These looked more professional, but the thing that really made me wonder was the phone calls. Our walls were thin enough that I could hear Mrs. Rodriguez's television through the wall, thin enough that I knew when the college students upstairs were having a party. And sometimes, late at night, I'd hear Michael talking on the phone. Not loud conversations, but the kind of intense, hushed discussions that sounded important. Businesslike. The kind of calls that unemployed people don't usually get at 11 p.m. But I was too busy drowning in my own problems to wonder why my broke neighbor seemed to have his life together. The next 2 weeks were a nightmare of job applications and rejections. Every potential employer wanted references from my previous job. When they called Richardson and Associates, they were told that I'd been terminated for cause due to an ongoing federal investigation. That was it. Interview over, door closed. Next applicant, please. I applied to retail jobs, restaurant jobs, cleaning services, anything that would hire someone with a black mark on their record. But even McDonald's wanted to do a background check, And even though I hadn't been charged with anything yet, the investigation showed up. 2 weeks after losing my job, the first rent payment bounced. I'd scraped together $900 from my savings account, money I'd been putting aside for Emma's school supplies and Tyler's winter coat. I deposited it into my checking account and wrote a check to Mr. Peterson, praying that somehow it would be enough to buy me more time. It wasn't. The check bounced, and Mr. Peterson called me that evening. "Sarah," his voice was tired, "your rent check was returned for insufficient funds." "I know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry. I thought I had enough in the account." "Sarah, you've been a good tenant for 2 years. I don't want to do this, but I've got my own family to think about, my own bills to pay. Please, Mr. Peterson, just give me 1 more week. I'm waiting to hear back from several job interviews." It was a lie. I hadn't had a job interview in 5 days. 1 week, Sarah. That's all I can do. After that, I'll have to start the formal eviction process. 1 week turned into 2. 2 weeks turned into 3. And with each passing day, I could feel the walls closing in. I started selling things: my grandmother's jewelry, my laptop, the small television from my bedroom, anything that might bring in a few dollars to buy groceries or keep the lights on. Emma noticed, of course. She was too smart not to. "Mommy, where's your computer?" she asked one evening while doing her homework at the kitchen table. "I had to take it to get fixed, sweetheart," I lied. "You can use the tablet for now." But Tyler, bless his innocent heart, was just happy to spend more time with me. He didn't understand why I was home all day now, but he loved having me there to play with him and read him stories. It was Tyler who first made friends with Michael. I was coming back from another fruitless job interview, this one at a dry cleaner that decided they didn't need help after all, when I saw Tyler sitting in the hallway outside our apartment door. "Tyler, what are you doing out here?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. "Where's Emma?" "She's inside doing homework," he said. "But I dropped my ball and it rolled over there." He pointed toward Michael's door. That's when I noticed Michael crouched down, talking to my 5-year-old son like they were old friends. "Is this your ball, buddy?" Michael was saying, holding up Tyler's red rubber ball. "Yeah, thank you, mister," Tyler said, his face lighting up with that pure joy that only children can manage. Michael looked up at me and smiled. He's a good kid, very polite. "Tyler, come here," I said, probably more sharply than I intended. "We don't bother the neighbors." "He wasn't bothering me," Michael said, standing up. "I was just coming home from the store." He was carrying a single grocery bag, and I caught a glimpse of what was inside. Expensive items. Organic vegetables, artisanal bread, a bottle of wine that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a week. "Thank you for returning his ball," I said, taking Tyler's hand. "No problem. And Sarah," he knew my name. How did he know my name? "If you ever need anything at all, I'm right next door." There was something in the way he said it that made me look at him more carefully. His clothes were simple, but they were good quality. His shoes were worn, but expensive. And his eyes had the kind of intelligence that comes from education and experience. "Thank you," I said. "That's very kind." But as I unlocked my door and ushered Tyler inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Michael than met the eye. That night, after putting the kids to bed, I sat at my kitchen table and did the math. Again. Rent, $1,800 plus $900 late fees. Electricity, $127, 2 months behind. Phone, $89. Groceries, $200. If I was very careful. Tyler Sasma medication, $67. Total, $3,183. Money in my account, 23/17. The numbers didn't lie. Even if I found a job tomorrow, even if they paid me immediately, I couldn't catch up. We were going to lose our home. I put my head down on the table and cried as quietly as I could, trying not to wake the children. That's when I heard the soft knock on my door. I looked at the clock. 9:47 p.m. Who would be knocking this late? I looked through the peephole and saw Michael standing in the hallway, holding what looked like a food container. I opened the door, probably looking like a mess with my red eyes and tear-stained cheeks. "I'm sorry to bother you so late," he said, his voice gentle. I made too much dinner and thought, well, I thought maybe you and the kids might like some. He held out a large glass container filled with what smelled like the most delicious beef stroganoff I'd ever encountered. Michael, you don't have to. I know I don't have to, he said, and there was something in his voice that made me really look at him. But I want to. I took the container, and it was warm in my hands. Real food, good food, the kind of meal I used to make for my family before everything fell apart. Thank you, I said, and my voice cracked a little. Really, thank you. He smiled, and for the first time, I noticed that he had a really nice smile. Warm and genuine. Sarah, he said, and then paused like he was deciding whether to say something. I know we don't know each other very well, but if you ever need to talk, or if there's anything I can do to help, I'm a good listener. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Good night, he said, and turned to go back to his apartment. Michael, I called after him. He turned back. How did you know my name? He smiled again. The mailbox is downstairs. Sarah Thompson, 3B. I'm Michael Stevens, 3A. Stevens. So that was his last name. After he left, I opened the container and nearly cried again. It wasn't just beef stroganoff. It was restaurant-quality beef stroganoff with tender meat and perfectly cooked noodles and a sauce that probably had wine in it. There was enough food for 3 people, maybe 4. I heated up small portions for myself and saved the rest for the kids' lunch tomorrow. As I ate, I couldn't help but wonder about Michael Stevens from 3A. The container itself was expensive, thick glass with an airtight seal, the kind that costs $20 or $25 at Williams-Sonoma. The food was clearly made by someone who knew how to cook, really cook. And he'd made too much? Who accidentally makes too much beef stroganoff? But I was too grateful and too tired to ask questions. That was my first mistake. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of voices in the hallway. Loud voices, angry voices. I looked through the peephole and saw Michael talking to 2 men in expensive suits. They weren't the same federal agents who'd been in my boss's office, but they had that same aura of authority and barely contained aggression. 3 months, one of them was saying. The deadline was 3 months ago. Michael's voice was calm, but I could see tension in the way he held his shoulders. I understand your position, but I need more time. Time's up, Stevens. You've had plenty of chances to make this right. Look, I'm working on it, but these things take time. You can't just— We can do whatever we want, the second man interrupted. And if you don't have our money by Friday, we're going to start taking collateral. Collateral. That word sent a chill down my spine. Friday, the first man repeated. Don't make us come back here again. They left, and Michael stood alone in that hallway for a long time. I watched him through the peephole, and I could see him running his hands through his hair, the way people do when they're stressed or scared. After they left, Michael stood alone in that hallway for 5 full minutes. And for the first time, I wondered, who was my neighbor really? What kind of debt required men in expensive suits to make house calls? What kind of collateral were they talking about? And why did Michael, who seemed so calm and put together, look genuinely frightened? But I had my own problems to worry about. That afternoon, I got a call that would change everything. Ms. Thompson, this is Jennifer Walsh from Bright Futures Elementary. I'm calling about Emma. My heart stopped. Is she okay? Is she hurt? She's fine physically, the school counselor said, but her teacher is concerned. Emma's been falling asleep in class and she seems distracted. When we asked her about it, she said she's been worried about her family. I closed my eyes. Emma, my brilliant, sensitive little girl, was carrying the weight of our problems on her 8-year-old shoulders. Ms. Thompson, I don't want to pry, but is everything okay at home? How do you explain to a school counselor that you're about to be homeless, that you've been accused of a crime you didn't commit, that you're failing as a mother in every way that matters? We're going through a difficult time, I said carefully, but we're managing. I see. Well, if there's anything the school can do to help, we have resources available for families in transition. Families in transition. That was a nice way of saying family's about to be homeless. After I hung up, I sat in my empty apartment, empty because I'd sold most of our furniture, and made a decision that would change everything. I was going to ask Michael for help, not money. I couldn't ask a neighbor for money, but maybe he knew someone who was hiring. Maybe he had connections. Maybe he could give me advice on how to handle the situation with the FBI. That afternoon, with 48 hours left before my final eviction deadline, I knocked on Michael's door. He answered quickly, like he'd been expecting someone. When he saw it was me, his expression shifted from wariness to concern. "Sarah, is everything okay?" "Actually, no," I said, and suddenly all the words came tumbling out. "Nothing's okay. I lost my job. I'm about to be evicted. My kids are suffering, and I don't know what to do." Michael stepped back and gestured for me to come in. "Come in. Please." I walked into his apartment, and it was like stepping into a different world. The space was beautiful. Not just clean and organized, but actually beautiful. The furniture was modern but comfortable, a leather sofa that looked like it came from a high-end store, a dining table made of solid wood, artwork on the walls that looked original, not like prints from Target. The kitchen was spotless and well-equipped. Professional-grade appliances, granite countertops, a wine rack filled with bottles that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. This wasn't the apartment of an unemployed man. This was the apartment of someone with money, real money. "Nice place," I said, trying to keep the surprise out of my voice. "Thanks," Michael said, but he seemed uncomfortable with the compliment. "Can I get you some coffee? Water?" "Coffee would be great." He moved around the kitchen with the ease of someone who spent a lot of time cooking. The coffee he made wasn't instant. It was freshly ground, the kind that fills the whole room with its aroma. "So," he said, handing me a mug, "tell me what's going on." And I did. I told him everything. About the accusations at work, about the forged signatures, about the eviction notice, about Emma falling asleep in class because she was worried about our family. Michael listened without interrupting, his face growing more serious with each detail. "Sarah," he said when I finished, "I'm so sorry. That's horrible. And you really had nothing to do with those transfers?" "Nothing," I said firmly. "I swear on my children's lives, I had nothing to do with it." Michael was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee cup. "What if I told you there might be a way to prove your innocence?" I looked up at him, hope flickering in my chest for the first time in weeks. "What do you mean?" "I know some people who work in financial investigation, people who specialize in tracking down this kind of fraud. They might be able to help you." "Michael, that kind of investigation costs thousands of dollars. I can barely afford groceries." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "What if money wasn't an issue?" "What do you mean?" "What if I paid for it?" I stared at him. "Why would you do that? You barely know me." Michael was quiet for a long moment, like he was deciding how much to tell me. "Because I've been where you are," he said finally. "I've been accused of something I didn't do. I know what it feels like to have everyone turn their back on you, to feel like the whole world thinks you're guilty. What happened to you? It's complicated. Maybe someday I'll tell you the whole story, but right now, the important thing is helping you." I looked around his beautiful apartment, at this man who claimed to understand my situation, and felt a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. "Michael, I appreciate the offer, I really do, but I can't accept that kind of help from someone I barely know." "Then get to know me," he said simply. "What?" "Stay here, you and the kids, just until you get back on your feet." I nearly choked on my coffee. "Stay here? Michael, I can't." "Why not? I have the space. You need a place to stay. It makes sense." "It makes sense to you, maybe, but I don't know anything about you. I don't know what you do for work, where your money comes from, why you're willing to help a stranger." "Then ask me," he said. "Ask me anything you want to know." I looked at him sitting across from me in his expensive apartment, offering to house my family and pay for a financial investigation, and I realized I was at a crossroads. I could say no, maintain my pride, and probably end up homeless with my children. Or I could say yes, accept help from this mysterious neighbor, and maybe just maybe, find a way to prove my innocence and rebuild our lives. If I say yes, I said slowly, I need to know that my children will be safe. I need to know that that you won't. Sarah, Michael said, his voice gentle but firm, I would never hurt you or your children. Never. I give you my word. There was something in his eyes when he said it that made me believe him. Okay, I said, but I have conditions. Name them. First, the kids and I share a room. Second, if I ever feel uncomfortable, or if you do anything that makes me question your motives, we leave immediately. Third, this is temporary. Just until I can get back on my feet. Agreed, Michael said without hesitation. And fourth, I said, I want to know who you really are. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. If we're going to be living under the same roof, I need to know who I'm trusting with my children's safety. Michael nodded slowly. That's fair. And Sarah, you can trust me. I know you have no reason to believe that right now, but you can. 2 hours later, I was carrying our belongings from 3B to 3A. It didn't take long. We didn't have much left after I'd sold everything of value. Emma was confused but excited about the adventure of staying with our neighbor. Tyler was thrilled to be living next door to the nice man who found my ball. But as I tucked my children into the guest room bed that night, a bed that was bigger and more comfortable than anything we'd had in our own apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important about Michael Stevens. The daily phone calls started immediately. Every day at 2 p.m., like clockwork, his phone would ring. He'd excuse himself, go into his bedroom, and close the door. I could hear the murmur of his voice through the walls, but never the actual words. The calls always lasted exactly 15 minutes, and when he came out, he always looked stressed. Work? I asked after the third day. Something like that, he said, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. Meanwhile, Michael was true to his word about helping with my case. He introduced me to a woman named Carol Martinez, who ran a financial investigation firm in Manhattan. Carol was impressive, sharp, professional, with the kind of confidence that comes from years of experience. Her office was in a sleek building in Midtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows and modern furniture. Sarah, she said during our first meeting, I've reviewed the preliminary information Michael sent me about your case. What your former employer did to you is unconscionable. You believe me? I asked. You believe I didn't do it? Honey, I've been investigating financial crimes for 12 years. I can spot a real criminal from a mile away, and you're not one. You're a victim. The relief I felt was overwhelming. For the first time in weeks, someone in a position of authority believed me. How much will this investigation cost? I asked. Carol glanced at Michael, who was sitting quietly in the corner of her office. That's already been taken care of. Michael, I can't let you... Sarah, he interrupted, let Carol do her job. We'll worry about the money later. But I was starting to realize that Michael's definition of later might be very different from mine. Carol's investigation moved quickly. Within a week, she'd uncovered evidence that would change everything. Sarah, you need to see this, she said, calling me to her office on a Friday afternoon. She spread a series of documents across her conference table: bank statements, transfer authorizations, computer logs. Look at the timestamps on these transfers, she said, pointing to a column of numbers. Every single one was initiated between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. Okay, I said, not understanding the significance. What time did you leave work every day? 5 o'clock. Sometimes 5:15 if I was finishing something up. And how long was your commute home? About 45 minutes on the subway. Carol smiled. So you were on a subway train, surrounded by witnesses, during every single one of these transfers. My heart started racing. That proves it wasn't me. That's just the beginning, Carol said, turning to another set of documents. Look at this. She showed me a detailed analysis of the forged signatures. I had these analyzed by a handwriting expert. The pressure patterns, the stroke angles, the spacing, they're all consistent with someone trying to copy your signature, but they're not natural. They're too careful, too deliberate. So someone was definitely forging my signature? Without a doubt, and I think I know who. Carol pulled out a final document, a security log from my former office building. This shows everyone who used their keycard to access the office after hours during the time period when the transfers were made. She pointed to a name that appeared over and over again: Richardson, James. Your boss was in the office during every single transfer. And Sarah, Carol paused dramatically. He was the only one in the office during those times. The pieces were falling into place. Mr. Richardson had been stealing from client accounts for months, maybe years. When the FBI started investigating, he needed a scapegoat. And I, the loyal administrative assistant who had access to client files, was the perfect fall guy. What do we do now? I asked. Now we take this evidence to the FBI and clear your name. And then, Carol's smile turned predatory. We make sure Mr. Richardson pays for what he did to you. That night, I came home to Michael's apartment feeling lighter than I had in months. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had hope. Michael was in the kitchen preparing dinner, something that smelled incredible and probably cost more than I used to spend on food in a week. Good news? He asked, seeing the expression on my face. The best news, I said, and I told him everything Carol had discovered. Michael listened with a smile that seemed genuinely happy for me. When I finished, he opened a bottle of wine, a bottle that probably cost more than my old monthly phone bill. This calls for a celebration, he said, pouring 2 glasses. We sat on his expensive sofa, drinking wine that tasted like it came from a vineyard I'd only seen in movies, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe everything was going to be okay. Michael, I said, feeling brave from the wine and the good news, I need to ask you something. Anything. Who are you, really? And don't tell me you're unemployed, because unemployed people don't live like this. Michael was quiet for a long moment, swirling the wine in his glass. You're right, he said finally. I'm not unemployed. Then what do you do? It's complicated, Sarah. Everything's complicated with you, I said, and I wasn't entirely joking. The phone calls, the expensive apartment, the ability to pay for a financial investigation without blinking. None of it adds up. Michael set down his wine glass and looked at me directly. What if I told you that I'm between jobs right now, but I have some savings put away? I'd say that's not really an answer. And what if I told you that the reason I have savings is because I used to work in finance, and I was good at it? I'd ask why you're not working in finance anymore. Michael sighed. Because I made some mistakes, big mistakes, and now I'm trying to figure out how to fix them. It wasn't a complete answer, but it was more than he'd told me before. What kind of mistakes? The kind that can ruin your life if you're not careful. Before I could ask more questions, his phone rang. It was 11:30 p.m., much later than his usual 2 p.m. calls. Michael looked at the caller ID and frowned. I need to take this. He went into his bedroom and closed the door, but this time his voice was louder, more agitated. No, it can't be now, I heard him say. I told you I need more time. I tried not to listen, but the walls were thin and his voice was carrying. I understand the pressure, but there are complications here. No, it's not about the money. It's personal. Personal. Was he talking about me? About the kids? Look, I know the project is behind schedule, but I can't just drop everything and leave. After this, I want out. I need time for myself. Project? What project? And leave. Was Michael planning to leave? Fine. Tomorrow morning. But this is the last time. He hung up and stayed in his bedroom for several minutes. When he came back to the living room, he looked tired and stressed. Everything okay? I asked. Yeah, just some business I need to take care of. At 11:30 at night? Michael sat down next to me on the sofa, closer than he'd sat before. Sarah, can I ask you something? Sure. If you found out that someone you trusted wasn't exactly who you thought they were, but they'd never hurt you or your children, could you forgive them? The question sent a chill down my spine. What kind of secret are we talking about? Not exactly a secret. More like not telling you everything about my situation. I looked at him, this man who'd taken us in, who'd paid for my investigation, who'd been nothing but kind to my children, and felt a growing sense of unease. Michael, are you trying to tell me something? He was quiet for a long moment, like he was wrestling with himself. "Not yet," he said finally. "But soon, I promise." That night, I lay awake in the guest room, listening to Emma and Tyler breathing softly beside me, and wondered what Michael was hiding. The next morning, everything changed. I was coming back from the grocery store, buying food with money Michael had given me, which still made me uncomfortable, when I saw the black SUV parked outside our building. Two people in dark suits were talking to Jorge, our building's doorman. One of them was showing him a photograph. When they saw me approaching with my grocery bags, the woman came toward me. "Excuse me, are you Sarah Thompson?" My blood turned to ice. "Yes. Why?" She pulled out a badge. "Agent Lisa Chen, FBI. We need to talk to you about Michael Stevens." Stevens, that was Michael's last name. But why was the FBI asking about him? "What about Michael?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Ma'am, do you know where Mr. Stevens is right now?" "He should be upstairs, in his apartment." "Why? What's going on?" Agent Chen exchanged a look with her partner, a younger man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Ma'am, Michael Stevens has been wanted by federal authorities for 6 months. He's suspected of involvement in a money laundering operation." The grocery bags slipped from my hands. Apples rolled across the sidewalk. A carton of milk split open, spreading white across the concrete. Money laundering. The man I'd been living with, the man who'd been caring for my children, was wanted by the FBI for money laundering. That can't be right," I stammered. "Michael wouldn't. He's been helping me. He's been taking care of my kids." "Ma'am, we understand this must be a shock," Agent Chen said, her voice gentler now. "But we need your help. We need to know everything about your relationship with Mr. Stevens." "Relationship? We don't have a relationship. He's my neighbor. He's been letting us stay with him because we were about to be evicted." The agents exchanged another look. "Ma'am, how long have you been living with Mr. Stevens?" 3 weeks. But it's not what you think. He's just helping us out." "And in those 3 weeks, has he mentioned anything about his work? About travel plans? About money?" I thought about the expensive apartment, the daily phone calls, the ability to pay for Carol's investigation without hesitation. "He said he used to work in finance," I said slowly. "He said he was between jobs." "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us to answer some questions, and we're going to need your help in locating Mr. Stevens." I looked up at the building, at the 3rd floor where my children were probably doing homework, where Michael was probably making them an after-school snack. "My kids," I said. "My kids are up there with him." "Ma'am, we need to get your children away from Mr. Stevens immediately." The world tilted. The man I'd trusted with my children's safety, the man who'd saved us from homelessness, was a federal fugitive. I climbed those 3 flights of stairs feeling like I was walking to my own execution. The agents followed behind me, their footsteps echoing in the stairwell. When I reached the 3rd floor, I could hear laughter coming from Michael's apartment. Tyler's giggle, Emma's voice, and Michael's deeper laugh in response. They were happy. My children were happy for the first time in months, and I was about to destroy that. I used my key to open the door, and the scene that greeted me was like something from a different life. Michael was sitting on the floor with Tyler, building something elaborate with Legos. Emma was at the dining table, working on homework, with a glass of milk and a plate of homemade cookies beside her. It looked like a family. It looked like the family I'd always wanted to give my children. Michael looked up when I walked in, and his smile faded immediately when he saw my expression. "Sarah, what's wrong?" That's when the FBI agent stepped into view behind me. Michael's face went completely white. He stood up slowly, his hands visible, like someone who'd been through this before. "Kids," he said, his voice remarkably calm. "Why don't you go to your room for a few minutes? Your mom and I need to talk to these people." "But we're not done with the spaceship," Tyler protested. "We'll finish it later, buddy," Michael said, ruffling Tyler's hair. "I promise." Emma, always more perceptive, looked between the agents and Michael with worried eyes. "Mom, what's happening?" "Just go to your room, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Everything's fine." After the kids left, Agent Chen stepped forward. Michael Stevens, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit money laundering and wire fraud. Michael didn't resist as they handcuffed him. He just looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Sarah, he said, I can explain. Explain what? I asked, my voice rising. Explain that you're a criminal? Explain that I've been living with a fugitive? Explain that I trusted you with my children? It's not what you think. Then what is it, Michael? What is it really? Agent Chen interrupted. Ma'am, we need to take Mr. Stevens into custody now. You and your children will need to come with us to answer some questions. As they led Michael away, he turned back to me one last time. Sarah, I never meant for this to happen. I never meant to hurt you. But you did, I said, and my voice broke. You did hurt me. Before I continue, if this story is hitting close to home, drop a heart in the comments. Sometimes we all need to know we're not alone in our struggles. The next few hours were a blur of questions and forms and explanations. The FBI wanted to know everything. How long I'd known Michael, what he'd told me about his work, whether I'd seen any suspicious activity. I told them the truth, that I barely knew him, that he'd helped me when I was desperate, that I'd had no idea he was wanted by federal authorities. Ms. Thompson, Agent Chen said after what felt like hours of questioning, we don't believe you had any knowledge of Mr. Stevens's criminal activities. You and your children are free to go. Go where? I asked. We don't have anywhere to go. The agent looked uncomfortable. That's not really our department. But there are social services that can help you find temporary housing. Temporary housing. A shelter. After everything I'd been through, after finally having hope that things were getting better, I was back where I started. Worse than where I started, because now I felt like a fool. That night, Emma, Tyler, and I slept in a family shelter in Brooklyn. The room was small and smelled like disinfectant, and Tyler cried because he missed Uncle Michael and didn't understand why we couldn't go back to the nice apartment. Where's Michael, Mommy? He asked for the 10th time. When is he coming back? He's not coming back, baby, I said, holding him close. He had to go away, but he promised we'd finish the spaceship. I closed my eyes and tried not to cry. Sometimes people can't keep their promises, Tyler. Emma, lying on the narrow cot next to us, was quiet, too quiet. Mom, she said finally, was Michael a bad man? How do you explain to an 8-year-old that the world isn't divided into good people and bad people? That someone can be kind and generous and caring, and also be a criminal? I don't know, sweetheart, I said honestly. I thought I knew him, but I guess I didn't. He was nice to us, Emma said. He helped you when you were sad. Yes, he did. So maybe he's not all bad? Out of the mouths of babes. But honey, that wasn't the end of the story. That was just the beginning of the hardest choice of my life. 6 months later, I was sitting in a courtroom in Lower Manhattan, watching the man I'd thought I loved face justice. A lot had changed in those 6 months. Thanks to Carol's investigation, I'd been completely cleared of all charges. Mr. Richardson had been arrested and charged with embezzlement and fraud. I'd even received a settlement from the accounting firm, enough money to get back on my feet and start over. I had a new job, a new apartment, and my children were thriving. Emma was back to her old self, getting straight A's and sleeping through the night. Tyler had stopped asking about Michael, though he still kept the Lego spaceship they'd been building together. I should have been happy. I should have been grateful for my second chance. But I couldn't stop thinking about Michael. The trial had been going on for 3 days. I'd followed every detail in the newspapers, even though I told myself I didn't care what happened to him. Michael's lawyer painted a picture of a man who'd been manipulated by his business partner, who'd gotten in over his head and made bad decisions out of fear rather than greed. The prosecution painted a picture of a calculating criminal who'd helped launder millions of dollars through shell companies and offshore accounts. The truth, as usual, was probably somewhere in between. But when Michael took the stand to testify on his own behalf, I saw something I hadn't expected. Remorse. Real, genuine remorse. Your Honor, he said, looking directly at the judge, I'm not going to stand here and claim I'm innocent. I made terrible decisions. I got involved with people I should have stayed away from, and I let fear cloud my judgment. He paused, and for a moment, his eyes found mine in the gallery. But I want to be clear about one thing. I never set out to hurt anyone. And when I realized how deep I was in, I tried to find a way out. That's why I was cooperating with federal investigators. Cooperating. That was news to me. I know that doesn't excuse what I did, Michael continued. I know I broke the law, and I know I hurt people who trusted me. But I want this court to know that I take full responsibility for my actions. The prosecutor stood up. Mr. Stevens, if you were cooperating with federal investigators, why did you flee? Why did you spend 6 months as a fugitive? Michael was quiet for a long moment. Because I was scared, he said finally. Scared of going to prison, scared of losing everything I'd worked for. But mostly, he looked at me again. Mostly I was scared of disappointing the people I cared about. And yet you continued to deceive people even while you were a fugitive, didn't you? You moved in next door to an innocent family. You let them believe you were someone you weren't? Yes, Michael said quietly. I did. You used Ms. Thompson and her children as cover for your criminal activities? No, Michael said, his voice stronger now. That's not what happened. Then what did happen, Mr. Stevens? Michael looked directly at me as he answered. I fell in love with them, he said. I fell in love with Sarah and her children, and for the first time in my life, I wanted to be the man they thought I was. My heart stopped. I know that doesn't excuse the lies, Michael continued. I know I should have told Sarah the truth from the beginning, but I was terrified that if she knew who I really was, she'd take her children and run, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing them. The prosecutor pressed on. So you admit that you deliberately deceived Ms. Thompson about your identity? Yes, Michael said, his voice barely above a whisper. I did. And you admit that you put her and her children at risk by involving them in your situation? Michael's shoulders sagged. Yes, and that's the part I'll never forgive myself for. Mr. Stevens, what would you say to Ms. Thompson if she were here today? Michael looked directly at me, and I felt like everyone in the courtroom could see straight into my soul. I would tell her that I'm sorry, he said, his voice breaking slightly. I would tell her that she and her children deserved so much better than the lies I told them. I would tell her that helping them wasn't part of some scheme. It was the most honest thing I'd done in years. He paused, wiping his eyes. And I would tell her that if I could go back and do it all over again, I would tell her the truth from the very first day. Because she deserved honesty. She deserved trust. And she deserved a man who was brave enough to be worthy of her love. I felt tears streaming down my face, and I didn't care who saw them. The trial lasted 2 more days. Expert witnesses testified about the money laundering scheme, about Michael's role in it, about his cooperation with federal investigators. It turned out that Michael had been working with the FBI for months before I met him, trying to gather evidence against his former business partner, Marcus Webb. Webb was the mastermind behind the operation, and Michael had gotten caught up in it when their legitimate consulting business had started struggling. Mr. Stevens was in an impossible position, his lawyer argued. He could either continue participating in illegal activities or risk his life by going against dangerous people. When he chose to cooperate with law enforcement, he became a target. The prosecution countered that Michael had made his choices and needed to face the consequences, regardless of his motivations. In the end, the judge sentenced Michael to 2 years in federal prison with work release privileges. He would serve his time at a minimum security facility and be allowed to work during the day. Mr. Stevens, the judge said, while I acknowledge your cooperation with law enforcement and your apparent remorse, you still participated in serious financial crimes. However, I also recognize that you were not the architect of this scheme, and your assistance has been valuable in prosecuting the real criminals. As the bailiff led Michael away, he looked back at me one more time. This time, he didn't try to speak. He just mouthed 2 words. I'm sorry. Y'all, I need to pause here because what happened next still gives me chills. If you're feeling the tension, smash that like button because this story is about to take a turn nobody saw coming. After the sentencing, I stood in the courthouse hallway, not knowing what to feel. Part of me was angry. Angry that he'd lied. Angry that he'd put my children at risk. Angry that I'd fallen for someone who wasn't who he claimed to be. But another part of me was heartbroken. Because despite everything, despite all the lies and deception, I couldn't forget the man who'd held Tyler when he had nightmares, who'd helped Emma with her homework, who'd made me feel like I wasn't alone in the world. Sarah? I turned to see Carol Martinez, the investigator who'd helped clear my name. I didn't expect to see you here, she said. I needed to see how it ended, I said. Carol studied my face. You still have feelings for him. It wasn't a question. I don't know what I feel, I said honestly. I'm angry and hurt and confused. But I also can't forget that he saved my life when I had nowhere else to turn. Sarah, can I tell you something? I've been investigating financial crimes for 15 years. I've seen real criminals, people who steal and lie and hurt others without a second thought. She paused. Michael Stevens isn't one of them. He made terrible choices, yes. But he's not a bad man. He's a scared man who got in over his head and then fell in love with a woman and her children. How can you be sure? Because I've seen the evidence. I've read the FBI reports. Michael was trying to get out of that situation long before he met you. And when he had the chance to disappear completely, to take the money and run to a country without extradition, he stayed. He stayed because of you and your kids. Carol handed me a business card. If you ever want to know the whole truth about what Michael did and why he did it, call me. I have access to files that weren't presented at trial. That night, I went home to my new apartment, a modest but comfortable 2-bedroom in a safe neighborhood in Queens, and tried to process everything I'd heard. Emma was doing homework at the kitchen table, and Tyler was playing with his toys in the living room. They seemed happy and settled, but I knew they still missed Michael. Tyler especially would sometimes ask when Uncle Michael was coming back, and I never knew what to say. Mom, Emma said, looking up from her math homework, was that man in the courtroom Uncle Michael? I'd tried to keep the trial from them, but Emma was too smart and too observant. Yes, sweetheart, it was. Is he in trouble? Yes, he made some bad choices, and now he has to face the consequences. Emma was quiet for a moment. Do you think he's sorry? I think he is, yes. Are you going to see him again? That was the question I'd been asking myself all day. I don't know, Emma. I really don't know. 2 weeks later, I made a decision that surprised even me. I went to visit Michael in prison. The Federal Correctional Facility was about an hour's drive from the city, a low-security complex that looked more like a college campus than a prison. I'd called ahead and put my name on Michael's visitor list, though I wasn't sure he'd want to see me. The visiting room was bright and clean, with small tables and plastic chairs. Families sat together, talking quietly, and the atmosphere was more sad than threatening. When Michael walked in, I barely recognized him. He'd lost weight, and his hair was shorter. He wore a standard-issue orange jumpsuit that made him look younger and more vulnerable. But when he saw me, his face lit up with a mixture of joy and disbelief. Sarah, he said, sitting down across from me. I can't believe you're here. I can't believe I'm here either, I said. We sat in silence for a moment, just looking at each other. How are the kids? He asked finally. They're good. Emma's doing well in school. Tyler's in kindergarten now. He still asks about you sometimes. Michael's eyes filled with tears. I miss them so much. I miss all of you. Michael, I said, I need to understand something. When you said you loved us, was that real? Or was it just part of whatever game you were playing? He looked me directly in the eyes. It was the most real thing in my life. Everything else, the business, the money, the lies, that was the game. But what I felt for you and the kids, that was the only honest thing about me. Then why didn't you trust me with the truth? Michael ran his hands through his shorter hair. Because I was a coward. Because I was terrified that if you knew who I really was, a man who'd gotten involved with criminals, who was being hunted by the FBI, you'd run. And I couldn't bear the thought of losing you. But you lost me anyway. I know. And that's something I'll have to live with for the rest of my life. I studied his face, looking for signs of deception, but all I saw was pain and regret. Carol Martinez told me you were trying to get out of the money laundering scheme before you met us. Is that true? Michael nodded. I'd been working with the FBI for months, trying to gather evidence against Marcus Webb and his associates. But it was dangerous. These weren't just white-collar criminals. They were connected to some very bad people. So when you helped me, when I helped you, it wasn't part of any plan. It was just, I saw a woman and her children who needed help, and I wanted to help them. For the first time in months, I had a chance to do something good instead of just trying to survive. And the investigation you paid for? I used money from my legitimate savings account. Money I'd earned before I got involved with Marcus. I wanted to help you clear your name because I knew what it felt like to be accused of something and have no one believe you. I felt my anger starting to soften, but I wasn't ready to let go of it completely. Michael, do you understand what you put us through? Do you understand that my children trusted you and then they had to watch you being arrested? Do you understand that I fell in love with someone who didn't exist? I existed, he said quietly. The man who cooked dinner for your family, who helped Tyler with his Legos, who listened to Emma read her stories. That was me. That was the real me. The only difference was that I didn't tell you about the worst parts of my life. The worst parts of your life were pretty significant, Michael. I know, and I should have trusted you with the truth. I should have believed that you were strong enough to handle it. We talked for another hour, and slowly, piece by piece, Michael told me the whole story. He'd started a legitimate financial consulting business with Marcus Webb 5 years earlier. They'd helped small businesses with their accounting and tax planning, and they'd been successful. But when the economy turned and their client base started shrinking, Marcus had suggested they expand into alternative financial services. At first, it seemed harmless, helping clients minimize their tax burden through creative accounting. But gradually, Marcus started bringing in clients who needed more than just tax advice. They needed money cleaned, transactions hidden, paper trails obscured. By the time Michael realized what was happening, he was already in too deep. Marcus had made sure that Michael's name was on key documents, that he was legally liable for the business's activities. When Michael tried to back out, Marcus threatened him, and not just with legal consequences. He told me that if I tried to leave or if I went to the authorities, I'd end up like Jimmy Torino, Michael said. Who's Jimmy Torino? A guy who used to work for Marcus. He tried to go to the FBI about 2 years ago. They found his body in the East River 3 weeks later. I felt a chill run down my spine. So you were afraid for your life? Terrified, but I also knew I couldn't keep doing what I was doing. So I reached out to the FBI and offered to cooperate. I started wearing a wire, gathering evidence, documenting everything. And that's when you went into hiding? Marcus found out I was working with the feds. I had about 6 hours warning before his people came looking for me. I grabbed what cash I could and disappeared. And you ended up in our building by coincidence? Michael smiled sadly. Pure coincidence. I was looking for a place to lay low, somewhere Marcus wouldn't think to look for me. A run-down apartment building in Queens seemed perfect. But your apartment wasn't run down. I'd been living there for 3 months before you moved in. I'd fixed it up, bought some furniture. I was trying to create some kind of normal life while I waited for the FBI to build their case against Marcus. And then I showed up, desperate and homeless. And then you showed up, Michael said, and suddenly I remembered what it felt like to care about something other than just surviving. I sat back in my chair, processing everything he'd told me. Michael, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Anything. If you could go back and do it all over again, would you still help me? Knowing that it would complicate your situation? Knowing that you'd eventually get caught? Michael didn't hesitate. Yes. 1,000 times yes. Those 3 weeks with you and the kids were the best 3 weeks of my life. Even knowing how it ended, I wouldn't change it. Even though it meant going to prison? Sarah, I was going to prison anyway. Marcus was never going to let me just walk away from what I knew. At least this way, I got to experience what it felt like to be part of a family. I got to feel like I mattered to someone. I felt tears starting again. You did matter to us. That's what made it so hard when we found out the truth. I know. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. We sat in silence for a few minutes, both of us crying. "What happens now?" I asked finally. "Now I serve my time. I work during the day at an accounting firm that hires ex-convicts, and I come back here at night. In 18 months, if I stay out of trouble, I'll be released. And then I try to rebuild my life. I try to become the man you thought I was." I looked at him sitting across from me in his orange jumpsuit, and I realized something that surprised me. I still loved him. Despite everything, the lies, the deception, the danger he'd put us in, I still loved the man who'd held my son during thunderstorms and helped my daughter with her homework. I still loved the man who'd saved us when we had nowhere else to turn. "Michael," I said, "I can't promise you anything. I can't promise that I'll wait for you or that we can ever have a relationship again. But I can promise you this. I'll bring the kids to visit you. If you want to see them." His face crumpled with relief and gratitude. "I would love that more than anything. And maybe we can figure out how to be friends, how to trust each other again. I would like that too." As I drove home that day, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: hope. Not hope for a fairy tale ending, but hope that maybe, with time and honesty and a lot of hard work, we could find a way to heal from this. Honey, if you're invested in this story, you need to subscribe, because what happened next will restore your faith in second chances. Hit that notification bell too, because you won't want to miss how this ends. Over the next 18 months, I visited Michael every few weeks. Sometimes I brought the kids, sometimes I went alone. Slowly, carefully, we started to rebuild trust. Michael was true to his word about honesty. He answered every question I asked, no matter how painful. He told me about his childhood, about the mistakes that had led him to Marcus Webb, about the fear and loneliness that had driven so many of his decisions. And I told him about my life too, about the struggles of single motherhood, about my fears and dreams, about how his betrayal had affected me and the children. It wasn't easy. There were visits where we argued, where old hurts surfaced, where I wondered if I was making a mistake by trying to forgive him. But there were also visits where we laughed together, where we talked about books and movies and the future, where I remembered why I'd fallen in love with him in the first place. Emma and Tyler loved seeing Uncle Michael again. They didn't fully understand why he had to live in the special place with rules, but they were just happy to have him back in their lives. Tyler finally got to finish the Lego spaceship they'd been building, and Emma shared her stories and school projects with him. Michael was a model prisoner. He worked hard at his job, took college courses, and stayed out of trouble. The other inmates respected him, and the guards trusted him. He was becoming the man he'd always had the potential to be, and slowly, carefully, I started to fall in love with him again. Not the fantasy version I'd fallen for before, but the real Michael. Flawed and complicated and human, but also kind and generous and genuinely remorseful for his mistakes. The day of his release, I was waiting in the parking lot with Emma and Tyler. They'd made a "Welcome Home" banner, and Tyler had brought the completed Lego spaceship to show Michael. When he walked out of the facility, carrying a small bag of belongings, he looked different. Older maybe, but also more at peace with himself. He'd used his time in prison to confront his demons and figure out who he wanted to be. "Uncle Michael!" Tyler shouted, running toward him. Michael dropped his bag and scooped Tyler up in a huge hug, spinning him around while Tyler giggled with delight. Emma was more reserved, but she hugged him too, and I could see the relief in her eyes. Her family was complete again. "Hi," Michael said to me, suddenly shy. "Hi," I said back. "Thank you for being here. Thank you for becoming someone worth being here for." We drove back to the city together, the kids chattering excitedly in the back seat while Michael and I sat in comfortable silence. We'd talked about this moment during our visits. What would happen when he got out, where our relationship would go from here. We'd decided to take things slowly. Michael had rented a small apartment in Queens, not far from us, but not too close either. He had a job lined up at a non-profit organization that helped ex-convicts reintegrate into society. He would rebuild his life step by step, and if things went well, maybe we could rebuild our relationship too. "Are you nervous?" I asked as we pulled into his new neighborhood. Terrified, he admitted, but also excited. For the first time in years, I feel like I have a real chance at happiness. You do, I said. We all do. That night, after we'd helped Michael settle into his new apartment and after I'd put the kids to bed, I sat on my couch and reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. 2 years ago, I'd been a desperate single mother facing eviction and false criminal charges. I'd trusted a stranger who turned out to be a fugitive, had my heart broken by his deception, and had to rebuild my life from scratch. But I'd also learned something important, that people are complicated, that love isn't always simple, and that sometimes the most broken people are capable of the most beautiful acts of kindness. Michael had lied to me, yes. He'd put my children and me in danger, but he'd also saved us when we had nowhere else to turn. He'd helped me clear my name and rebuild my life. And he'd shown my children what it felt like to have a father figure who cared about them. Was it enough to forgive him? Was it enough to try again? I didn't know, but I was willing to find out. 6 months later, Michael and I were officially dating again. We took it slow, building trust day by day, conversation by conversation. He was patient with my fears and doubts, and I was patient with his guilt and shame. The kids were thrilled to have him back in their lives on a regular basis. He came to Emma's school plays and Tyler's soccer games. He helped with homework and cooked family dinners, and slowly became the father figure they'd always needed. 1 year after his release, Michael proposed. We were at the same park where Tyler had lost his ball all those years ago, the place where our story had really begun. The kids were playing on the swings while Michael and I sat on a bench, watching them. "Sarah," he said, taking my hand, "I know I don't deserve a second chance. I know I hurt you and the kids in ways that can never be completely healed. Michael, let me finish," he said gently. "I know I can't change the past. I can't take back the lies or the fear or the pain I caused. But I can promise you this. For the rest of my life, I will be honest with you. I will protect you and the children. I will work every day to be worthy of your love." He got down on one knee, pulling out a simple but beautiful ring. "Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life making up for the mistakes I made?" I looked at this man who'd saved me and betrayed me and saved me again, and I knew my answer. "Yes," I said, tears streaming down my face. "Yes, I'll marry you." Emma and Tyler came running over, having noticed the commotion, and when they saw the ring, they started jumping up and down with excitement. "Are you going to be our real dad now?" Tyler asked. "If you'll have me," Michael said, hugging both kids. "We'll have you," Emma said solemnly. "We've been waiting for you to come home." We got married 6 months later, in a small ceremony in Central Park, surrounded by the people who mattered most to us. Carol Martinez was my maid of honor, and Tyler was Michael's best man. Emma walked me down the aisle, proud and beautiful in her flower girl dress. As we exchanged vows, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. The desperation and fear, the lies and betrayal, the slow process of forgiveness and healing. "I promise to love you," Michael said, his voice strong and clear. "Not just in the easy moments, but in the difficult ones too. I promise to be honest with you, even when the truth is hard to hear. And I promise to spend every day trying to be the man you and the children deserve. I promise to trust you," I said, "even when it's scary. I promise to forgive you when you make mistakes and to let you forgive me when I make mine. And I promise to build a life with you based on truth and love and second chances." When the minister pronounced us husband and wife, the small crowd erupted in cheers. But all I could see was Michael's face, shining with joy and love and gratitude. Today, 5 years later, I'm sitting on the porch of our house in Westchester, a beautiful colonial with a big backyard where Tyler plays soccer and Emma reads under the old oak tree. Michael is inside, helping Tyler with his math homework while Emma practices piano. We're not perfect. We still have moments of doubt, times when the past creeps in and threatens our happiness. But we've learned to talk through those moments, to face them together instead of letting them drive us apart. Michael kept his promise about honesty. He tells me everything now, his fears, his dreams, his struggles with guilt over his past. And I've learned to trust him again, not because he's perfect, but because he's proven himself worthy of that trust. The kids are thriving. Emma is a sophomore in high school now, brilliant and confident and kind. She wants to be a lawyer, inspired by our experience with the justice system. Tyler is in middle school, a natural athlete with Michael's gentle nature and my stubborn streak. They both call Michael Dad now, and he's earned that title through years of patient love and consistent presence. He's the one who taught Tyler to ride a bike and helped Emma through her first heartbreak. He's the one who shows up to every game and recital and parent-teacher conference. My business has grown too. I now run a successful consulting firm that helps small businesses with their finances and administration. Ironically, some of my clients are ex-convicts trying to start legitimate businesses, and Michael often helps me understand their unique challenges. We've also started a nonprofit organization that provides support to families affected by white-collar crime, both victims and the families of perpetrators. We know firsthand how devastating these crimes can be, not just financially, but emotionally, and we want to help others navigate the complex process of healing and rebuilding. Sometimes people ask me how I could forgive someone who lied to me so completely, how I could trust someone who'd been involved in criminal activity, how I could risk my children's safety and happiness on a man with such a complicated past. The answer isn't simple, because forgiveness never is. But I learned that people aren't just their worst mistakes. Michael made terrible choices, yes, but he also made the choice to help a desperate stranger and her children. He made the choice to cooperate with law enforcement, even when it put him in danger. He made the choice to face the consequences of his actions instead of running away. And most importantly, he made the choice to change, to become better, to earn back the trust he'd lost. That doesn't excuse what he did. It doesn't erase the pain he caused. But it does mean that redemption is possible, that people can change, that love can survive even the most devastating betrayals. From a desperate single mother facing eviction to a successful businesswoman with a loving family, from lies and betrayal to truth and trust, from a broken heart to a love stronger than I ever thought possible. Sometimes angels come disguised as broken people carrying heavy secrets. But when love is real, when forgiveness is genuine, when people are willing to do the hard work of healing and growth, miracles can happen. And honey, if that's not worth believing in, I don't know what is. What lesson hit you hardest in this story? The power of forgiveness? The courage to start over? Or maybe that everyone deserves a second chance? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one and love hearing how these stories touch your lives. If this gave you hope for your own situation, smash that like button. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, share it with them. Subscribe for more real stories of love, loss, and second chances. Hit that notification bell because next week's story will blow your mind. Remember, your story isn't over. The best chapters might still be coming. Love y'all, and I'll see you next time.